So, Phil, here we are again, right as bans are supposed to happen again. And here we, like clockwork, you've been winning with miracles.
Yeah, I mean, my trajectory on always finding something that's working right before a ban shakeup has happened for the last couple of ban cycles. But it also has just come from de facto just adding the broken cards in the format to a deck. I added Beanstalk to my deck, and I've been doing well online. I've been doing well in locals. I'm going to bring it to the Legacy event that's happening at the Excalibur event in Pittsburgh in August. Just already starting to do prep for that. We've been talking about
we're gonna go to that
Eternal Weekends previously. Where we just get in a certain requisite number of reps before we sling at a major event. I've been taking that to heart this year, knowing that we're going to be able to go to multiple Eternal Weekends, and so I want to be able to have a sharper deck list that is not without reach of what I think my strengths are, but without voluntarily handicapping by not playing one of the power outliers. So even though I think it's all horseshit and like it would be better if like a bunch of cards in the format didn't exist, since they do, and we say yes and now to those things.
Yes,
that I've adopted Beanstalk to a lesser extent. Stock up. I am playing. I've been waffling between 2 to 4 stock up in a Beanstalk list, just as like additional ways. Because like really what I've found is anybody who wants to check it out, I'm not going to change my Moxfield too heavily for the next little while, unless there's like a big shakeup from the bans.
Well, I'll put it on the Eternal Durdles Moxfield. I'm going to copy and paste it right now.
3-for-1 Trading is buying all Magic the Gathering singles and entire collections, big and small.
They're one of the top trading card game traders, buying way over 1 million Magic cards a year, and they are more than happy to make an offer on your cards.
In addition to sending in your cards, you'll also have a chance to sell and trade with them at MagicCon Las Vegas, taking place from June 20th to 22nd.
You can support the channel by using the link 341.gg/sell-ed.
Huge thanks to 3-for-1 Trading for supporting the Legacy community. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, I do tinker with the sideboard. Like that is the stuff that I'm still figuring out. I'm still in that realm of like solving that stuff. But I think that like committing to something for a little while, rather than like, I think committing to something for a little while is like, you know, a long heuristic of like learn the play patterns of like certain things. But like you do get certain points in positions where you know how to navigate when you're playing something that's slightly off the beaten path. Like I think the most powerful version of Beanstalk is still the Sultai, Bowmaster, Murktide type list now with Rakshas's Bargain. And I think that like Rakshas's Bargain, I think is better than stock up in that if you're in the colors, and so you are going to be paying 3 mana, like 3 mana. And when I say 3 mana, I mean like non-ancient 2 mana. I mean 3 actual lands being tapped for your spell. I think Rakshas's Bargain is better than stock up just because instant speed is that valuable. And since they both get to play around Bowmasters,
right?
I mean, in an ideal world, I'd really like to be able to play Brain Surge, but I think that Brain Surge is soft banned as long as Bowmaster's in the format. It's just too punishing to ever get caught by that card, and that card is too high of a percentage in the top deck list to be able to play it. Although, like, the type of thing that I'm doing, I would like to be able to play that card more so. But really what it is that you just want 8 Beanstalks, or 8 of that kind of effect that is your heavy card advantage effect. It does work that I'm on a 4 Mystic Sanctuary build as per usual, and stock up is good with Mystic Sanctuary if you need to grind in that fashion. But that's a lot more late game. Like you've sort of won the early battles if you're getting to those types of positions. But all that is to say that for all of my brewers that are out there that are still working on trying to figure something out, as like there's the shift with the Saga upgrade between the with that works with all the moon effects and Harbinger and stuff like that. I think that like just embracing that. If you can find something that still brings you joy while embracing a power outlier, you will. The power outliers will carry you. Like I'll say that, like having played Beanstalk in my deck the last handful of weeks, the last fortnight, I'd say, and I played Beanstalk before, and I remember not really all enjoying it because really all that matters is establishing the power outlier, and that is still true. It is still true. Like the games where you have a Beanstalk versus the games where you don't have a Beanstalk is so wildly and vastly different in terms of like how much your deck is just so much more powerful. And that nothing else really matters, to the point where I'm playing. We've had the conversation of like how I think Ponder is too slow, and in a lot of ways, I still get that sentiment, but I also understand what Eka Baronin said about like your range of hands and your blue count and all that stuff. But in the build that I've been playing, it's a 4 terminus 4 Beanstalk deck, and so I'm also playing 4 Portent in addition to the whole thing. So I've gone in the hard in the opposing direction, not because I think that Portent is good, but because I think you just want more ways to have you want a higher range of keepable hands to find your Beanstalk. So like just more, even if it's more air, just more air that is able to help you find a Beanstalk by turn 2 is a high enough value call to me that I'm playing the full suite, and I wouldn't go any less than that because you need to find your Beanstalks in those types of decks. But that can go for any power outlier, really. I think for all the stuff like as we come up on bans and everybody wants to talk about Entomb or oops all spells or what have you, I think that like the sort of ban discussion that we've had where it's always something like the ban list discussion that we have, granted the WotC doesn't take enough action each ban list, they're always slow to get there, and we've had that conversation before, but I think that like the ban list conversation every time a ban list comes around will always exist as long as these individual power outliers that just make games wholly and entirely about themselves and nothing else persist. Because
yeah, I mean the impetus is on the format every time a ban announcement comes around as well, is to power down the format. Like that's why you're doing a ban, right? Is to slowly power down the format. Like there's rarely a time.
No. Finish your thought. I just want to interject on that. I don't think that it is about powering down the format.
Well,
I think it's something different. I think what the community wants is something different. And
well,
I'm going to speak to that.
I'm talking about it as the company designing the game. The whole concept, the whole, you know, the what's the word I'm looking for here? The faucet that is the the fire extinguisher of using a ban and restricted announcement. Period. Like just the concept of that as a game design mechanic is built so that you can bring the power, you can level the power back down, right? Like there's a spike in the power somewhere, and you're going to have to sand it down by removing that thing. So I think that's also like a thing we have, like in the favor of a deck like yours that is attempting to play and maybe not the highest power level, and assuming that Beanstalk doesn't get banned, you've got your deck can pretty much only get better after a ban announcement. Now that hasn't always been the case. It certainly wasn't the case after the last one. It takes a while to figure these things out as a control deck, but I think you've got a good shot of coming out of this ban announcement with a slightly lower power legacy format, perhaps. Assuming they don't just say, "Oh, we're going to unban, like Survival of the Fittest" or something like that.
I think that like my take on, like, yes, I agree. Like there's probably some amount of just semantics when it comes to what is the use of the ban list. Yes, if you get rid of like whatever they ban, presumably lowers the power of the power of the format because it is too powerful. But I also think that like there's a broad stroke of something that they haven't really tapped into that I think has been like a recurring theme every time we come around to the ban announcements is just experience. The experience that we have when we sit down to play Legacy. They've been curating what has been like the power, like when they got rid of Grief and when they get rid of Psychic Frog and when they got rid of Troll. They're essentially trying to tag the top deck that has too large of a percentage, and people are running into the same deck over and over again, and that deck happens to be consistent enough that people are getting a redundant experience enough that they're going, this just isn't fun anymore. To do the exact same thing over and over again, it is, like the sequencing of Entomb, Reanimate, put Attraction into play, and the game is effectively over. It's just like not all that interesting and doesn't leave much room for decision trees.
Sure.
Now, I think that like what would be more beneficial for WotC to explore in any future ban announcement that they tap into isn't to just go, okay, what is like the top layer that we can shave off that is this experience? Like we can take another shot at Reanimator because it's the top of the format and the highest percentage played, blah 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 blah. That can be Entomb, it can be something else, whatever. They're gonna miss every time anyway. It could be like, okay, yeah, let's just get rid of Oops because this is just not a fundamental play pattern that we would like to have part of the format or available in the format, even though the percentage doesn't necessarily suggest that it is worth a ban because it's a low enough percentage of the field, but it's a percentage enough of the field that is suggested that when people run into it and it really salts them on things that they don't want to have that experience anymore, then we get rid of it, even if it isn't necessarily of another metric that they would consider ban-worthy.
That's the Sowing Mycospawn ban.
That's the Sowing Mycospawn ban. I think that leaning harder into like collective experience, like if the majority sentiment of something is like, okay, this just isn't fun, like these games are not fun, and that's where it becomes touch and go in like, okay, well, fun is subjective, and how do we navigate that sort of thing?
Well, there are ways to navigate that, Phil. Let me interject here real fast. There are ways, right? One of them is, of course, you can survey a lot of players, right? But you're never going to get like a great, like there's too many roads to bias in a survey like that, because it's just, how do you feel about the format is always going to be the people who are most bought into the format are the ones going to be taking that survey. But you can also look at the absence of players at your local, the number of stores that are no longer running legacy events, that sort of thing informs player sentiment way more than a survey would do. You know, we like this came out, our ban restricted announcement came out yesterday. Our episode came out yesterday, right? You're going to get a lot of opinions about people who are very bought into the format, who do care about the format, but they're not going to, aside from a couple rare instances, they're not going to tell you the story. I'm just not playing Legacy anymore because it's not fun for me. You know, you're not going to get that story, and that is maybe one of the biggest stories to take into account when making these decisions, right? Like, if you know, you look at the 10 years ago when we used to go to 20-sided store, every Monday night that place was packed to the gills, right? I can't get a local to run at my regular once a month now, you know? So you have stories like that, you know, and of course, all of this is anecdotal, but you can, you know, I say all that to say this, you can measure that. It is measurable.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield.com. Moxfield is the best deck building website on the internet. You can find all of my and Phil's decks in links below, including decks from this episode. And if you do, you'll be directly supporting the channel.
It is measurable. I would be hesitant to presume that they would ever take the time or resources to figure out a significant portion of that measurement to then make a practical decision on. That not to say that they couldn't do that. They certainly could do that. They're a multi-billion-dollar company. They can do whatever the fuck they want. But I think that like a way that they could calibrate in a way that is the most unobstructive to their day-to-day of not caring about Legacy to do anything for it is like, rather than leaning on whatever anecdotal is that we can present, or that like even if they like outsourced all of that to, you know, Legacy panel, blah blah blah, all of that is just like a lot of excess work and data that like even if they were to collect enough of it, how much would be sufficient for them to make a reasonable decision that would actually benefit the format at large to the largest number of players, to, you know, improve the experience so that you would be able to run a local at in your area. I think that, and this is just like over the last couple of weeks, you know, in the lead up, we have a couple of articles now up on turtledurdles.com that have, you know, waged into the ban discussion stuff. And there's some people who argue for like there's the power level concerns, like Entomb tying the room together and minimizing the reanimator package, and then there's a bunch of people who are like, well, we also presume that WotC is never actually going to go after this thing that they've never otherwise touched and just consider a pillar, even though they don't explicitly say that, but they do explicitly say that they want reanimator to exist. But then what does that actually mean? Does that mean that Entomb is inherently part of what they suggest is reanimator? Because if so, then that presumes that when they say reanimator is a pillar and that we're going to keep it as part of the format, then Entomb is untouchable in that case. But like that's touch and go, and they'll never actually explicitly say if Entomb is part of that or not until they ban it or don't ban it. But then if they don't ban it, then we just continue having this conversation. And if they do ban it, then we go, oh, I guess that wasn't actually part of the conversation. But then what do they ever mean that means anything? And so like there's this lack of transparency in clear communication for any of those things. I think to make a ban where it doesn't feel like they are just a year's worth of ban announcements behind is to go, if we were to do a mass haul to the format the way that they did in Modern 2 cycles ago, what would that look like? What would be the cards that would be swept up in something that was their attempt at an overhaul of Legacy to essentially course correct it from the like incessant power creep that Modern Horizons era has brought to it? And I would look at cards that they have tested, right? They have tested, even if it wasn't for Legacy, but they have tested and they have looked at other formats and taken action in against other formats. And it's the cards that like unilaterally by themselves make the game wholly and entirely about them. Because those are the experiences where when that card is in play, that card obsoletes every other decision that you would make. Because that card is so overwhelmingly powerful to the game that as long as that card is there, nothing else is relevant. And the only way that you can get around that is you either like do the same thing and go hard in that same way, or you ignore it and try and do something that can undercut it and just go like, and that's where we get like a super heavy fast combo.
It's almost like you're asking for a Legacy game changers list.
Yeah, sure. That's a reasonable way to put it. Yeah. Essentially, like, if there is a card that, like, when this happens, people are like, well, all of our decisions are obsoleted until this thing is removed from the table, because this makes it so that every decision you make is so much less impactful to the point of not being meaningless, then what else are we doing? I think, like, to a lesser extent, when they banned One Ring in Modern, and, like, One Ring is only in the Ancient Tomb decks, really. If it ever gets swept up in a ban, good. I don't think it's doing anything healthy for the format. But, like, it is from what they have done when they banned it in Modern, it was the poster child of like this thing that like when this touches the table, nothing else matters. we can do a bunch of other things. There will be other things that happen, but nothing will matter as long as this thing is in play. The only thing that will matter is finding the second One Ring to prevent you from dying to your own One Ring after you've drawn half your library, right? Like, but like all of the other things that we can do, it either has to happen before the One Ring touches the table, or once it touches the table, nothing matters unless that thing is removed or in some way dealt with. But if it isn't, then it just is the snowball that otherwise ends the game. There is like the argument to suggest that was what Oko was, right? Once Oko touched the table, nothing else was relevant to the game. To a similar extent, but in a more narrow window, when Ragavan on the play touched the table, nothing else was relevant. And if that happened, the game was effectively over. In that, like, it was such a snowball that the only thing that mattered was protecting that thing at all costs. Yeah. And
same thing with Dreadhorde Arcanist. You can Bowmasters. Basically anything that got backed up by days, right?
You can argue the same thing that's why people didn't like Psychic Frog. Once Psychic Frog touched, everybody was like, well, this is just the thing that is going to overhaul the game no matter what. Now, of course, there are like, different pressure points on each of those cards depending on like the type of matchup that you're running in against. Like I ran into less problem with Psychic Frog because I was a ship pile of 12 white removal spells, but like but not everybody is doing that. But that's also an over index for a card, right? But it's the same thing with Grief, right? Like we just play this Grief, we reanimate the Grief, we strip all the stuff that would interact with the Grief, and then hopefully the game is just over before any meaningful development happened. Like to different degrees, there are these cards that just make the game wholly and entirely about themselves and nothing else. And I think that if we were just to remove those cards, like there was a couple like this recent week, like Tamiyo has gotten a bunch of heat on it.
I'm surprised how many people talked about Tamiyo.
A lot of people have talked about Tamiyo, but I think that like when from editing these articles that I've been getting to post on EternalDurdles.com, the conversations that I've been having outside of that, and like all the people who are looking at Tamiyo, they're looking at Tamiyo as we can't touch the pillars, right? Like Days is never going to get touched. Like if Tomb doesn't get touched because Entomb is just a pseudo Days, like in the same.
Is it a pillar? If it is, then we have to try and take
we don't know
something else.
Right, but like if Entomb is in the same like protected space as Days for whatever reason that they've just arbitrarily decided that that's the case, then it's like, okay, well, then what else do we do? And then people, I think, looking at Tamiyo, they're not. I don't. Yes, like is drawing your library, half your library for a single blue mana like too powerful? Yeah, probably. But like, are there things to do with it? Yeah, there's Prismatic Ending and Power Blast, and like even though there's the thing where you can't really like fire a removal spell at it if they're holding up blue mana because you can't get it countered by Brainstorm, and there's like all this like negative play pattern that just like funnels the snowball. It is another one of those instances where I think that people looking at Tamiyo aren't looking at Tamiyo, at least from my POV, they're not looking at Tamiyo as Tamiyo the individual card. They're looking at Tamiyo as this like redundant recurrent play pattern of these power outliers that just make games entirely only about them. And as long as they're there, nothing else can matter because that's the only thing. We can't like get into like, can I get into combat with it? Well, not if you're trying to go wide with small creatures. Can we can I like fight over? Well, like if there's something on the table that would deal with it, that's a bigger creature, they can just down tick it, find a removal spell, remove the thing, and then keep upticking. So it's like this game, this one thing solves all the problems for itself, and then otherwise I just need to protect it and wins the game. That I think is indicative of all these other power outliers.
It's funny to me that look, what was the tagline when got banned, right? When Deathrat Shaman got banned, 1 mana Planeswalker, right? Same thing with Ragavan. People were like, that's a 1 mana Planeswalker. Now we have an actual 1 mana Planeswalker, and I'm not calling for the ban of Tamiyo. I still haven't recorded at this point. I have not recorded my take yet because I wanted to get everyone else's take and then kind of let myself be washed over in their takes to make my final decision. So I'm not sure that I would call for the ban of Tamiyo or not yet. I think it's early, personally, to jump on that bandwagon. But it is funny that like they just keep printing, cards that are at power level 1 mana Planeswalker, and then like everyone's like surprised when like all of a sudden like they take over games. Think your Legacy or pre-modern deck is the truth?
Or total garbage? We'll play it either way.
Join our donation deck Patreon tier.
Choose ForceofPhil to run your deck through a league and maybe, probably, definitely, most maybe even win every single game.
Go to patreon.com/EternalDurdles.
I have been playing Beanstalk in my deck for, the last bit of time, and I've been winning a lot more. And I find that, like, even when I'm playing with it, the games where I have a Beanstalk, so many decisions matter so much less just because Beanstalk makes up for anything that I might do. Like, everything that I do, just replacing itself.
You don't have to worry about whether or not you should ForceofPhil a card, because you're probably going to.
Because
You're like, I want to see more cards.
Like it's like, as long as I have this Beanstalk in play, whatever you do doesn't matter. Whatever I do doesn't matter. Like we can just make all these exchanges, and as long as this Beanstalk is on the table, it doesn't matter. And like, if I play a Beanstalk and my opponent must ForceofPhil it, because if they don't, and I have a ForceofPhil, and I just force their next play, and now I'm up all these cards and like stop their critical juncture for no mana, the game is done. Now, but like, that also leads to, if I play, like, if you and I are playing against each other, if I play a Beanstalk, you have to force it. But then if I force it back, the game is still pretty much locked up, because you have spent 2 cards, I have spent 2 cards, but my Beanstalk replaces itself, and I have an engine on the table. If that was just a thing where I like went up 1 card and now we're still jockeying for position, like, okay, cool, the game continues. But like, I have an engine piece on the table that now must be removed, and all I have to do is ensure that this engine piece stays on the table. The same can be said for One Ring. The same can be said for Tamiyo. The same can be said for all of the cards that I think are the experience that people don't enjoy. I think that, like, once these cards enter the game only becomes about them, and so every game that they're involved in feels really similar. So any game that becomes about these individual power outliers, it goes, these games are less fun because there is no real variance to these play patterns. Like, the thing happens, that's the only thing that matters, and then anything else is chafe.
Well, walking away from the design end, what's actionable from this is that you should be playing them.
Of course, you should be playing them, because they are the problem.
But
I think that, like,
playing these cards.
I would be curious to hear other people's thoughts before we do our community ban announcement episode, where everybody talks about what they would like to see happen.
That happened yesterday.
That happened yesterday. I think coming out of that is, aside from individual cards going, that if there isn't something like, if it's not just exactly specifically like Entomb or whatever it is that's got the most heat on it at the moment, what is the experience that we actually want Legacy to look like?
What is the philosophy that the format should have, right?
And what should it have now that we're in this world of like fire hosing cards into the format every single set, and knowing that they're going to arbitrarily power creep design to essentially rotate Legacy continuously multiple times a year? What does it actually look like? And I think if we're just going, transgressive cards need a place to live, which was the caveat of old, well, transgressive cards are getting replaced by new transgressive cards.
This is true. Yeah.
Like, the transgressive cards that need a place to live don't really exist when they get power crept out. And so if there's a new paradigm for the format, what does that actually look like? What is the experience that we would like Legacy to be? I would like it to be a decision-rich interactive format. Now, I think there are a lot of cards that remove the denseness and richness of those decisions and make it so that it is a less enjoyable format, because it makes it so it's about cards that obsolete the part of Magic that is enjoyable, which is interactive gameplay that is trying to navigate yourself into winning positions and maneuver opponents and matchups and think critically about like how to solve problems creatively or uniquely within your archetype.
Yeah, there was a jockeying for position that sort of just doesn't exist in the format right now.
And it does,
but like such a granular, very early level that like once that mulligan decision has been made, right? That was your jockeying for position.
I think it's because a lot of design nowadays, to solve for like the fact that they're designing for a 4-player format and everything does everything. Part of what that is there are just so many cards that beget cards or create conditions that are not mana gated. And so because they have like undercut the system that is supposed to balance game objects, more so for just like time or conditional aspects, it means that the resources that you need to like solve for something are less so, and it obsoletes a whole swath of design, which is like trying to get resources for resources' sake. Everything is an engine that snowballs. There's a difference between something like, if you were to look at something like the simplest thing that I can think of, because like I played a lot of Predict recently, but like Predict is a single shot thing that goes up a card, right? And going up a card, a single instance, like anything that does something like that makes no sense in a world of a thing that just does it over and over and over and over until the game is
Where there's a card that says every turn draw an extra card.
Like if Barrogoyf only did the thing one time, maybe it's like, but like it itself is an individual engine that is hard to interact with, that every time it touches is tutoring something. One Ring is just a thing that snowballs every single turn more and more and more. Tamiyo just draws a card every single turn until you try to deal with it, in which case it's very easily blanked, and then when it's flipped, it just draws half its library 3 turns later. Like, and none of those things are mana gated. Those are all things that you just get for applying a condition, and the condition that they're asking you to do is nothing. Literally, it's just playing the thing as it would otherwise be played, and no other decision has to be made.
Yeah.
What else am I going to do other than tick up my planeswalker? What else am I going to do other than attack with my deck?
Come on.
What's up?
Well, you need brainstorm.
Well, you need brainstorm, but like the threat of it alone is enough to end the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but even if you don't do that, it is still itself is an engine. Right,
it
itself is a card draw engine.
You could conceivably, if you didn't even have brainstorm in your deck, you could conceivably get to a point where you have 4 mana out and you flip Tamiyo
and blank any type of removal
from clue tokens, right? Like just playing the card does the card's thing.
No, I'm not saying that like, oh, it's Tamiyo that has to go.
It's just a fine example. That's all. Yeah, I agree.
It's a fine example because it is in the like subsection of cards that I think are the reason why we keep coming back to, like, it's the same thing like Uro was like a long time ago, back when Uro was seeing a ton of play. You remember when Uro was like this thing that was like really unfun and essentially blanked black as part of like the metagame experience at all until they power corrupt all of the threats in black and made the format like so obscenely fast that playing your 3-drop that gains you a life and draws a card just wasn't fast enough. But at the time when Uro was just like everywhere and exceptionally unfun, if you weren't playing Source to Plowshares, was because it was the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
It was this recurring engine that just did the thing and it asked nothing of you other than to play. And I think that like that paradigm shift of design of we will reward you for doing nothing that you wouldn't have already otherwise been doing, so you don't have to change your behavior or your deck building at all. And then all these cards that are not otherwise mana-gated, they just give you the stuff. I think that makes for really redundant play, and then that makes us sour on like the experience, and then we try and target that experience by going after whatever the thing that is like most prominent at doing that, which has happened to have been Blue-Black Reanimator over the last couple of ban lists just because it's been the top deck. But I think like you could have like it could have been any of those. Like if it were just Beanstalk at the top of the format, like if it was Sultai Beanstalk, it was just crushing at the rate that Blue-Black Reanimator is. I think it would be the same conversation, and instead of Entomb, it would be Beanstalk. Or if it was nothing but Ancient Tomb decks with One Ring crushing at every one of those events, it would be the same conversation, but One Ring instead of Beanstalk or Entomb. And like if Dimir Tempo is just taking over, Tamiyo is the most played creature in the format right now. It's like okay, then we look at Baragoyf and we look at Tamiyo. Like I think Bowmaster sucks on the format because it's an oppressor. But it is not the same. Like Bowmaster to me is like Daze, where it is obsoleting cards from ever seeing play because it exists. But that's different than the snowballs that cause redundant play patterns over and over and over again. Now those are two different things. And I think that like if we say like we're okay with soft oppressors because Daze is a pillar, in which case I would buoy Bowmaster into that same conversation where it's like Bowmaster is making it so that like X ones that will be printed from now until forever, you will always have to look at it through the lens of Bowmaster exists, so therefore we can't play it. Same thing like Urza Saga, every time a 1-mana artifact is ever printed, you're going to have to go, okay, is this like singleton thing that Urza Saga can always get a redundant enough thing that like the power level is just too pushed and now we have to look at it, you know? But like artifact decks are always going to have to be Urza Saga decks, right? Like that's just how it is. And like Urza Saga also is in the space of like it just does the same thing every game. And like you may argue that like no, it like you have useful things in the tutor targets or whatever. It's like does it really? It's really just 20 power worth of creatures more often than not, like overwhelming percentage of the time. Same thing. I'm not saying that like Urza Saga is the thing that needs to go. I'm just saying that it's in the camp of all of these snowball threats that make games the same over and over and over again. And I'm repeating myself over and over and over again because that's the metaphor, Zach.
Yeah. Everyone can tell it's a metaphor. Phil, speaking of getting rewarded by doing nothing, people can join our deck donation Patreon tier at Eternal Durdles Patreon. So that's patreon.com/Eternal Durdles. And we will play your decks on stream. I think that's how better to get rewarded, Phil.
How better to get rewarded than that? And also, if you have your thoughts, if you think, Zach, Phil, you guys are full of shit, I know what the problem is. Submit an article to eternaldurdles.com. I'll edit and publish you on there. Just hit me up at ForceofPhil on any social or Discord.
You can personally attack us. We'll still print it. Anyhow,
I'll edit my personal attacks, absolutely.
Yes, edit your own personal attacks. With that said, thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the flip. If you made it this far, you probably like Legacy, Pre-Modern, or our sultry voices. So do us a favor.
Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and help keep the Eternal Durdles engine running.
Check out our new donation deck tier on Patreon. You pick the deck, we play it on the channel.
It supports the show, so sleeve up something spicy, completely unplayable, or punish me with a deck that doesn't have Brainstorm in it.
Links are in the description. You can go to patreon.com/EternalDurdles. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll check you in the next one.